Well, the albacore by comparison with the swordfish, was a really comfortable. I mean, for one thing, the swordfish was an open aeroplane, and whereas the albacore was nice and comfortable and much better equipped from the navigator's point of view, and a very good aeroplane. I mean, for the job it had to do, which was mostly night flying, very good dive bomber, and well, I mean, I think it was quite for its job. It was really about as good as you'd want.
Sort of. It was like a swordfish, but it was an enclosed cockpit. No difference really. The engine wasn't quite the same. It was a Bristol in that was quite a bit different, but virtually the aircraft was the same. I don't know if you know, but the tailplane was offset. So because if it was in line, it wouldn't keep straight. So they offset it, and that kept it straight. Stupid thing. You think I'm joking, don't you? One of the typical things that they gave to the Navy.
Interesting that. To me, the only advantage of the albacore was you had a better view forward. It was much stiffer on the controls, and I think that the evidence of its unsuitability as a replacement for the swordfish, which is what was the intention, is the fact that it didn't become one. People realized that it could not handle the work required of the swordfish. And of course we're coming to that work which made the swordfish what it was in terms of lasting through the war, its ability to handle the deck. The albacore was bigger, heavier, and less responsive to the control column.
We did a bit of night flying at Crail too. Oh, we also flew the albacore there, which was the successor, should have been the successor to the swordfish, but it didn't actually work out very well. And I flew them quite a lot. In fact, they were rather, if you like, a sort of Rolls-Royce version of the swordfish. But they all had fixed undercarriages. They also had enclosed cockpits. The swordfish was open cockpit. So they were more comfortable. It had a rather smoother engine. It was the Bristol Taurus engine, and it was a bigger engine altogether. But the story was that they weren't all that reliable. I was lucky, I touched wood, in the albacores I flew. I never had an engine failure, except on one occasion when I ran out of petrol. But I did have 2 or 3 occasions when the oil pressure wasn't there, and I had to abort an operation.
I was allocated to an air station called Crail, which was right on the east coast of Scotland, to 785 Squadron, which was a squadron of albacores and swordfish. And that's where I more or less learnt all about the aircraft. Having never seen it till then, learned all about the aircraft and became eventually qualified to sign. So then I could do work on the aircraft and sign for it. In the albacore, slightly larger aircraft. Basically, it did the same job as a swordfish, and as I say, it was used in the same way as it still had canvas wings, a fabric body, but with this enclosed cockpit. That was about the only difference. Oh, I'd say it did cruise at about 120, 130, probably might even get up to 180 on a dive. Once again, it wasn't very fast. And it was just as really ugly and cumbersome as the swordfish. And I say just as old-fashioned, really, but they didn't use them a lot. The swordfish could do just as much as what the albacore could do, and it was an easier aircraft to fly and less expensive to run, I presume. The only advantage they got over the swordfish, they had an enclosed cockpit, and it was a bit more comfortable for the air crew, but basically they could only do the same as what the swordfish did. And use more petrol doing it, and more oil, because they used to use a hell of a lot of oil for the lubrication.
Designed to succeed the well-tried Swordfish, the Fairey Albacore, like her famous predecessor, a biplane with folding wings, was specially built to operate as a torpedo bomber from aircraft carriers, and she's been carrying on the same fighting tradition. She was in the forefront of the historic action at Matapan, where torpedoes launched from albacores so slowed down the fast-fleeing Italian fleet that our big ships were able to gain a resounding victory.
An observer and an air gunner, telegraphist air gunner. The observer's main job was navigation. If the navigator had dropped dead half the time, I'd never have got back, I don't think. The telegraphist air gunner was using the radio and using his silly little machine gun if we were attacked by enemy aircraft. Well, I had to fly the thing, do what I was told by the navigator, and keep my eyes peeled for these objects on the water.
Well, the albacore was, you were separated, the pilot was separated from the navigator by a 600-gallon fuel tank, so no way of getting near him. The pilot had a machine gun in the wing. We could carry 4 bombs or 4 depth charges and flares. The navigator had 2 machine guns and a radio set behind, full proper radio, which was recessed but would swing out when you wanted to use it. The method of attack was done by a steep dive. You did almost a vertical dive onto your target from about 3,000 feet possibly. We did have forward-seeking radar, and their job, as I just said before, was laying smoke in the daytime and armed patrols at night. They were all black, same as the Swordfish were, yeah.
The albacore had this important difference, whereas in the Swordfish, if the observer wanted to attract your attention because your plug had come out or something, he'd just knock you on your shoulder and hit you on your shoulder. Whereas in the albacore, you had the fuel tank between you and the crew after. You were out of touch with them.
The only thing is, when we had to do gunnery practice, we had 2 machine guns which were pivoted in the centre. Vickers 303, I can't remember, but I think it was something around about 100 rounds a minute or something like that. Now, he didn't fire directly astern because of your own tail, you had to miss that. So he fired out the side. He was told to fire both guns together, one gun singly and the other gun singly. Both guns together, no trouble. Fire the gun nearest the propeller, or the front, no trouble. You fire the one where you got recoil allied to slipstream, and before you knew where it was, that thing was whipped out your hands. And I, in common with practically everybody else, put about 5 bullets through my own tailplane before I could get my finger on the trigger. They never warned us about that, mind you. Yeah, it was, if one gun, provided it was the side countering the slipstream, no trouble. But the one allied to the slipstream, you couldn't hold it.
Here she comes. And straight away we see that the albacore is a single bay biplane with a radial engine and a fixed undercarriage. As she moves round a bit, she shows us a long blunt nose and an engine perched on the end. Large, well-glazed cockpit breaking the line of the upper wing. Now the straight edges and rounded tips of both wings with a cutout at fuselage, allowing wings to fold back. There's a lot of that cockpit, and fuselage tapers back to a large rounded fin and rudder and a high-mounted tailplane.
I then went for a torpedo dropping course in Crail, and we were really introduced to a Navy proper then, the Fleet Air Arm proper, and albacores and Swordfish. That's the first time I'd flown either of them. Well, of course, the open cockpit wasn't very pleasant, very cold, and For landing, you had to cock your head over the side like that to see between the spars of the wings. Whereas in the Albacore, you were up in front, you had a marvellous view, perfect for deck landing, a lovely quiet engine, and for night purposes, a quiet engine and a slow flying was absolutely ideal. I mean, the Swordfish cruised along at about 70 or 80 knots, and the Albacore about 10 knots more. But of course, being slow, they made nice deck landing aircraft. Both of them, they're biplanes, so you could turn quickly, turn inside an enemy fighter, we hoped. Generally very manoeuvrable. But I think any Swordfish pilot who rolled them, as I've heard they did do, I think he was an idiot. They weren't really designed for it.
The main difference was power and a closed-in cockpit. In fact, I should add a third to that, because the cockpit was moved from behind the wings to in front of the wings. Behaviour-wise, I would think it would be fair to say they were very similar indeed. If anything, the Albacore slightly heavier on the controls. I don't know why that should be, because it wasn't that much heavier an aeroplane. I guess it must have been a bit because of the different size and bigger engine. I had reason to I had reason to wonder at one point when I took an Albacore up one night up in Scotland, just near Dundee this was, and one of my many lives. Yeah.
They were quite good actually. They're more like a private biplane, well, not exactly like a Tiger Moth, but they would do very tight turns and that sort of you want doing. As I say, they dive in at not exactly vertically, but almost vertically, which used to frighten me a bit because the wings would fold, because they're originally designed for aircraft carriers, and the bolt that held them was no thicker than my finger. And I thought, if that bolt shears, the wings will come off.
Let's take her in detail. Long blunt nose, rising to large enclosed cockpit. Cockpit tapers well along the fuselage. Large rounded fin and rudder. Fixed undercarriage. No spats, but sturdy legs. Fixed tail wheel. Remember, you may see torpedoes slung between the wheels.
So, the Albacore had a Bristol Taurus engine, which was more powerful than that of the old Bristol Pegasus. By how much I couldn't tell you exactly, but probably a quarter more strength and power, maybe more. So when you flew a Swordfish down to take off on runway at full throttle, it just gently ran down and increased speed and nothing happened, except you took off, yeah. But when you were in an Albacore and you opened the throttle, a giant hand started to push in your back. That was the first time I'd ever felt that, and of course you know that from modern flying, when the jet flies, suddenly somebody goes whoa like that behind you. The Albacore did have that quality, but with the cockpit in front of these wings and the Taurus engine smack in front of you, so only 4 or 5, just the other side of the cockpit perspex were the ventilators for the engine to open and shut, keep it cool or whatever, and the radial engine itself.
Let's go. I was doing circuits and bumps, Swordfish, flying other aircraft. I flew an Albacore at this stage, which was, an Albacore had a cockpit cover. It was inside, like a gentleman's aircraft with an armchair to sit in and everything else. good view, propellers in front, the wings almost behind you, if I remember rightly. So you're sitting there looking at things. A beautiful, nice aeroplane to fly. It had peculiarities of its engine, but it was okay. You know, it flew. And the engine was a development aircraft that they found some problems with the lower cylinders. But it was a nice aircraft. The engine ran well. But it reminds me of the problems that the Americans were having with radials when they first brought Martlets over to this country, and people were flying them. And the engines were failing very rapidly because all the bottom cylinders were seizing. And a friend of mine had a bit of a problem with a Martlet in Scotland, and he got badly concussed, and he was sent where we joined him later on at Yeovilton. But that was one of the problems. We're still in the development stage, both here and across the water, with aircrafts and aircraft engines, aircraft styles. And you got some of the relics of it. You know, if it started, they accepted it, and then they suddenly found there was a problem. You got the secondary aircraft life, but that's one of those things. Anyway.
Yeah, it was a bigger aircraft. It had the Taurus engine in it, which was a bigger engine than the Pegasus. And straight to say, it was a different type of engine altogether. It was a sleeve valve engine. Still had a 3-bladed prop. It's very hard to describe a sleeve valve engine. It didn't have any actual in and out tappet valves, you know, like the ordinary cars got, you know, and the crank and the camshaft. Your valves were open and closed. It had a sleeve, and that sleeve went up and down and rotated. And as it rotated, it opened and closed ports in the actual cylinder itself, and acted as a inlet and exhaust valves in a car. And it was actually a rotating sleeve, and that was worked by cranks off a timed gear shaft at the back. And as the piston went up, say on compression stroke, the sleeve would rotate and close the ports off, so you got compression. And then as it come down to go on to the exhaust stroke, it had been rotated a little bit farther and up the exhaust ports and let the exhaust gases get out. And then as the piston was exhausting and coming down to induction stroke, it opened the inlet ports and let the mixture come in and repeat the action all the time. And there was 9 cylinders that was doing that. They used a lot of oil because of the friction between the piston inside the sleeve and the sleeve inside the cylinder going up and down. It was a real it was a very economical engine, but and a lot more powerful. But it was the intricate working of these sleeves and the valves was quite good actually. It's Bristol made it. They made both the engines, and straight to say in the end, I'm digressing a bit here, but the Sea Fury aircraft, which I worked on in the RAN, had a Centaurus engine that was a double sleeves. So instead of 9 cylinders, there are 18 cylinders with sleeves inside rotating around. But that's getting ahead.
Would you know the albacore in the distance? Well, coming in closer, let's make sure you will next time. Radial engine. That large cockpit looks narrow and just breaks the line of the top wing. Both wings dihedral from roots. This is what we call the single bay. Looks as if it has single struts, one each side. There are actually 2 inner struts as well, set so close in that you'll rarely see them. The tailplane mounted high, and a fixed undercarriage. Very close to, you may see the bracing from struts to fuselage. No, you won't be in doubt next time. You'll know the albacore when you see her.
First of all, we practiced low flying over the sea, and then the actual manoeuvre itself of flying at 10,000 feet, diving down and being put into echelon starboard or port, according to what the flight leader wanted, and approaching a ship. And you use a sight made of little electric light bulbs, a sight to put the ship's speed on so you could aim off in front, you see. And after that we'd drop dummy torpedoes, just great weights like torpedoes. And then when we were really skilled, we were allowed to drop dummy torpedoes, which actually drove forward without explosive, of course, and hope you'd hit a ship. And then having got that right, they sent us to Arbroath to do a deck landing course. Now they'd mark out the airfield, bit of the airfield like a deck, fairly short thing, and explain all the signals the batsman had to make, go higher, okay, go lower, things like that. And of course when we got to America, the Americans had the exact opposite. And having got that right on the deck, you were passed out, but you could join the squadron without ever having actually seen an aircraft carrier. I didn't land on a carrier deck till I was appointed to Victorious. And then I did a take-off in harbour. That was a very strong wind. The ship was anchored, and when it swung into wind, they'd let me go. There was no problem with that as long as you got the deck, enough deck and enough wind. Just go straight ahead, pray, and get airborne, turn right so that you've got a clear air for the aircraft behind you. And of course, having got airborne, I found all the balloons and scappa were in my way, and I had to dodge those. Then I found my oil pressure, you see the oil pressure dropping or oil temperature rising, so I thought I wasn't going to make it to Hatstone, where I was at the airfield in the Orkneys. But in fact, it was an instrument failure. I got there all right. You're landing you're approaching rather nose up. In our AF terms, it'd be a precautionary landing in a small field if you don't know where you are. You'd approach like that, and you would go right down the deck if you could, like that, quite gently. The batsman would give you a cut. He'd just guide you down, or he might wave you off if you were making a hash of it. Or if a commander flying doesn't like it, he'd fire a red very light across the deck. Now the American landing was completely different. They'd fly level flight like that. You'd get a cut high above the deck and you'd sort of land like that with a bang. So once you got the cut, nose up high, you'd sort of do that. And you really would bang it down, but the American undercarriage would stand it, whereas the British one wouldn't. We would have had the undercarriage splayed out in no time. Well, you've got these cables across the deck and you've got a hook which you let down at the back and it catches if you're lucky. If you don't, it might bounce over all the wires and you go into a crash barrier in front made of wire mesh which would stop you going into the aircraft up forward where they're parked. But I actually caught my hook in the wire in the barrier when it was down. The man operating it saw that I was going slow enough and he lowered it in time, and I caught my hook in the barrier and saved my face getting a bit red, saved the aircraft and me.
The CO said, you've got some night flying to catch up on, Wickman. Take an albacore up tonight and do a few addles, as we call them, in the aerodrome, dummy deck landings, do a few of those to start with, and then climb up to 3,000 or 4,000 feet and do course steering for 2 or 3 hours. So I do this for 30 or 40 minutes, and I'm past the aerodrome at about 5,000 feet perhaps. I'm going north. It's pitch black. Can't see the horizon or anything now. A few lights in the cockpit, that's all. And I've left the aerodrome behind me. I don't know how long or how far, but there was a big bang from the engine. Bang! I thought, it's not supposed to do that, yeah. What do I do? Bang! A second bang. I thought, jeepers. Looked down at my dials. The boost, controlled by the amount of throttle pressure, boost was dropping off. A few drops of oil were coming on the perspex, and I thought, I've got engine failure, except the prop was still turning. And although I opened it, the throttle, nothing happened. It didn't go any faster. I looked at the altimeter and I was losing height slightly. So I thought, prop's still turning, but I'm losing height. What do I do? What would you do? I got 3 alternatives, my brain told me very quickly, racing around. Bail out. Yes, but you see, open the cockpit hood, slide it back, dive over there to the right. The wings are behind me. The main plane is just behind me, and then there's wires and struts. If I bail out, I will be bashed by the wing. If I fall low, I might hit the wire struts and cut my leg off or something. Don't fancy doing that, no. Turn the plane upside down, and bang my harness and fall out. A possibility. How would you like to turn upside down at Scotland in the middle of the night and fall out, not knowing when you were going to hit the ground, not even being able to see whether your parachute had opened or not? My brain discarded that alternative, and the last one was get back to the aerodrome. Can I do it? Don't know. How far am I? Where is it? Which direction? Don't know. Oh God. Do it. So I tightened my straps tight as possible, spun the albacore around and went back south. Kept watching the altimeter, and slowly the needle was coming round and down. I was down to 3,000 feet and then 2. I thought, if something done happens, I'm going to hit the ground. And I won't be able to know where I am. Probably won't matter then, no. And I saw the lights in the distance of the aerodrome. And I guess I would be at 1,000 feet and probably half a mile to 3/4 of a mile away, something like that. By this time, my windscreen is virtually covered with oil, and I'm just waiting for the sparks to hit the oil and set the windscreen on fire. But it didn't happen. No. And I found myself on the downward leg, the addles going on, of course, night landings and circuits and so on. I thought, I'll send out SOS on my navigation light underneath. So I tapped out, Nobody saw it. They were watching the addles, you see. We come onto the crosswind leg, very short. I'm now down to 100 feet, something like that. I think, I know, a Veli pistol. I pulled the Veli pistol out and put a red cartridge in, lifted it above my head, bang, and up went a red rocket like that. Yeah. Nobody saw it. They weren't watching. They were looking down. Yeah. I got to the end of the runway, was beginning to turn to land onto it. And at the end of the runway, there's a van with a chap with an Aldis, green or red. I got a red Aldis. Do not land. What I couldn't see was there was another plane coming in underneath me and behind me. I knew I must not therefore land. So what alternative do I have? I've got to get down. Sparks like mad. Could hardly see out of the front cockpit window. So, all right, so I land on the grass, not on the runway. But the grass, this is not Lord's turf. And I did a reasonable three-point landing, and I didn't find any holes, fortunately, and the albacore rumbled to a stop. I breathed out, I turned the petrol off, pressed the fire extinguisher, stopped the engine, banged my straps, and sat back and thank God for that.
Now, see what you can remember and check those points in flight. Distinctive engine, looking almost as if it's going to drop off. Height of cockpit at front. The fixed undercarriage. And the large rounded fin and rudder. Here comes the albacore to take a look at you. Directly overhead, that nose does appear to be long. Wings, obviously parallel to each other, the same length too, and there's the cutout. High up, nose and wings still spell albacore. Closer to again, the fuselage tapering to rudder well beyond tailplane, which is also tapered and shows a very definite cutout to allow for that rudder. So if you see a biplane with a sturdy fixed undercarriage, untapered round-tipped wings of equal span, high tapered cockpit, and a very large rounded fin and rudder, she's an albacore, still striking out for the Navy.
The Fleet Air Arm was a very ill-equipped service, and when one thinks of what was done by so many people in the early part of the war, it's remarkable they achieved the things that they did do. On the other hand, of course, there were not many aircraft like the Albacore that you could do the job that we were actually doing with. So in a way, one is sitting on two fences, because if you want to do that job, you need a slow, easy, manageable aeroplane. To do that job. A modern aircraft would never be able to do it. Any of the aircraft that are flying today, you would never be able to do that job at all. But of course that job might not exist either. It would be done by other weapons, I suspect.
We were sent back to Bertram Newton, January of the following year, 45, and we didn't know why we were going back. We thought to do something to the aircraft, and we found that we was converting to Swordfish. We cheesed off with it. And the fact that being open cockpits and exposed to the weather, I thought, oh no, we're going backwards instead of going forwards. But having said that, with hindsight, that was a wonderful aircraft for the job it was given. The reason being that the Swordfish could carry the Mark 11 radar, which is exactly the same as the Lancasters used to carry, because it had a wider undercarriage that would take the scanner. It would only carry 4 bombs as compared to the Albacore 6 bombs. The Navigator only had 1 gun instead of 2. And the thing that, as far as the crews were concerned, they were open cockpits, so he was exposed to not so much the rain, because the rain was swept away from him. He didn't get wet, not until he stopped, but he did get pretty cold.
Next morning I went to the squadron office. The CO was saying, good, marvellous piece of airmanship last night from you, Rickman. I said, no, it's a matter of luck, sir. I just happened to be near enough to get back. I didn't know I was. There was no judgment in it. It was just sheer hope and effort on my part. Now, he said, hang on, but the engineering officers wants to show you something. And the door opened, and in came the station engineering officer carrying a sort of tin, a bit like a shoebox, but made of metal. And he put it down the table, and he said, now then, Sir Lieutenant Rickman, have a look at this. And he took the top off. And inside there was a thick, blackish oil with a million stars in it. Shiny little stars there. He said, that was the contents of the sump of your Albacore from last night. What happened when you heard those bangs was that the connecting rod, the conrod between the cam one end and the piston the other, one conrod broke. And therefore it's flapping about, going up and down the cylinder, knocking bits off it all the time. And then because of the irregularity, out of balance, another one went somewhere else. So you had 2 conrods broken. And that's all bits of your cylinders all mixed up with the oil. Isn't that marvellous? Just what I need to show my fitters, show them what happens when two conrods break on an Albacore. I can't say I was that impressed.